It was Halloween night in the small, gloomy town of Cold Hill. The townsfolk, though accustomed to mysterious tales about the holiday, had no idea of the true terror awaiting them that year, something they would never forget. And this is that story. The strange tradition. Cold Hill is an ancient town, surrounded by dense forests and marshy land, shrouded in an air of mystery. Every Halloween night, a curious tradition takes over the town. No one leaves their homes after sunset. Windows are covered, lights dimmed, and an unsettling silence blankets the streets. This tradition began nearly a century ago, after 3 children mysteriously disappeared while playing trick-or-treat. Their screams echoed through the trees, but no one could find them. Since that tragedy, Halloween has become a day of dread in the town, and families lock themselves in, praying for the night to pass without further harm. The townsfolk say that every Halloween, shadows roam the deserted streets, but no one knows what they truly are. Some believe they are the souls of the lost children, while others think they are something much older and sinister. The fatal challenge. On a cold Halloween night, a group of friends decided to break the superstition. Jake, Sarah, Mike, and Lisa, all young and skeptical, chose to explore the town after dark, convinced that all the old stories were mere myths. They grabbed flashlights and backpacks, setting off on a trail through the forest to reach the cemetery atop a hill, the place where the missing children were last seen. The night air was especially silent, thick, and cold. As they ventured deeper into the woods, they felt an inexplicable weight pressing down on them, as if something invisible was watching. Sarah was the first to mention sensing a presence, but the others laughed, blaming her nerves. "We won't let a silly story scare us," Jake said, trying to lighten the mood. However, as they neared the cemetery, an unshakable feeling of dread enveloped them. None could explain it, but each step forward felt like walking into a trap. Finally, they reached the cemetery, and at the stroke of midnight, the distant church bells tolled, signaling the start of Halloween's darkest hour. In the farthest corner of the cemetery, something moved. They brushed it off as the wind rustling the trees. But on closer inspection, they realized it was something else. Shadows, human-like figures gliding between the gravestones. Mike pointed his flashlight at one of them, but the beam seemed to pass right through. The friends exchanged glances, their hearts pounding as a feeling of panic began to take root. And then, suddenly, the silence was pierced by distant whispers, numerous voices intertwining in a disturbing and ghostly chant. Sarah grabbed Jake's arm, her voice trembling as she urged them to turn back. But it was too late. The shadows surrounded them, forming a perfect circle as if with purpose, as if they were alive. The legend comes to life. The shadows began to whisper their names. Jake, Sarah, Mike, Lisa. The voices were like those of children, but carried a haunting sadness, a bitterness that cut through the air like icy knives. They tried to run, but their feet were anchored to the ground. Lisa was the first to faint, collapsing into Mike's arms. Jake and Sarah tried to drag her away, but the whispers turned into wails, agonizing cries for help, screams of children who had waited an eternity to be heard. Jake looked around in pure terror and noticed something different from the other shadows. A boy, pale and dressed in old-fashioned clothes, stood among them, his empty eyes fixed on the group. "Why did you come here?" he whispered before melting back into the shadows. Jake screamed, trying to wake his friends, but their bodies were cold as stone. Suddenly, Jake's mind was flooded with visions, fragmented memories of a horrible night, children wandering through a dark forest, calling for help that never came. A sense of guilt washed over him, as if he knew the children from another life, a life where a careless adult had abandoned them in the woods. The next morning, their bodies were found scattered in the forest, and the town, engulfed in shame and horror, made a silent pact to bury the events of that fateful Halloween. Cold Hill rewrote its history, erasing the tragedy, leaving behind only a vague superstition. However, those souls, the souls of the lost children, had not forgotten. They waited year after year for someone to come and give them the justice that had been denied. And tonight was their night. The final twist, desperate to escape, Jake began to murmur something, a prayer or plea he didn't even know. The shadows seemed to recede a little, and he managed to grab Sarah, dragging her out of the cemetery. Breathless and trembling, they looked back to see the shadows slowly dissolving into the dawn mist. When they finally reached the town center, they noticed something strange. The streets were empty, with doors and windows tightly shut, as if the entire town had vanished. Frantically, they knocked on door after door, but no one answered. It was as if they had entered a different realm, a place where Halloween would stretch infinitely and where shadows ruled. As they stumbled down the deserted main street, Jake noticed a statue he had never seen before, a dark, looming figure in the center of the town square. His blood ran cold as he recognized the faces carved into it, his along with Sarah's, Mike's, and Lisa's. There, in the heart of Cold Hill, stood a monument to the lost souls of Halloween. Forever etched in stone, it bore their names, a silent reminder to all who dared to break the ancient pact. So, when Halloween comes and the shadows stretch deep into the night, remember the town of Cold Hill. And if you hear a whisper in the dark, calling your name, resist the urge to respond. For some souls must rest in peace, and others, well, they may just be waiting to pull you in.